Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Mushaq Mushtaq Deen's play, The Betterment Society, which I'm reading out of the Methuen Drama Book of Trans Plays. Highly recommended. So this is a really dynamic play where a lot of stuff is going on. But the thing that really interests me about this play is the conflict between a desire for improvement or refinement, or to have nicer, better lives, I guess, things, whatever it is, versus this sort of pragmatic need to stay alive in a society that does not provide the resources to help people stay alive. So this is a three-person play. We have three characters. Well, I say three characters. We have three characters with dialogue, and then we have one multi-actor character. Talk about that in just a little bit. So we've got Gertie, who's the oldest of the three protagonists in the play. She's hard and she's often cruel, but she's been made hard and cruel by this extremely difficult life on this mountain. So basically the geography of this play is there's a mountain where Gertie, Lynette, and Doreen live. And then there's town, which seems to include a brothel and some shops where you can sell your own body parts, and people who are sort of cyborgs in a way. Like they are partially plastic people. So this is the sort of dystopian world of the play. Gertie has really been worn down by this. We don't actually know that she was ever kinder or more supportive or collaborative than she is now, but clearly, to some extent, at least, her current attitude and her just absolute skepticism, resistance to any sort of change is based on the struggle she's had in her life. Lynette is a somewhat more dynamic character. She starts out having founded the Betterment Society. And basically what she says is that for too long, we women, we ladies, have been focused on survival. Instead of just surviving, it's high time we thought about thriving. I'm starting this here first ever Betterment Society so that we will have a place for us to improve ourselves. We will learn about the finer things, and in due course we will become finer people. Let it be recorded that the very first members were Miss Doreen and Miss Gertie, and that the society was founded by Miss Lynette. So, Lynette initially wants to improve their life. And it's a very rough life that they're living. It is like they are subsistence hunters, subsistence fishers. They're growing crops that can be sold down in town, but it's a hard scrabble life. Like the worst of Appalachian poverty from, say, the 1800s is what we're envisioning here. And what Lynette wants is something better. Even if it's not sort of systemically better or wide scale better. She would like to have their three-person society to have some manners and to be able to quilt and to do these things that she regards as these sort of symbols of civilization or sophistication. Gertie is dead set against this. In fact, threatening to shoot Lynette repeatedly because of these attempts to improve them with the Betterment Society. And then our third character is Doreen. Doreen wants to improve, but she also kind of doesn't understand necessarily what's going on. And I say doesn't understand, not in the sense that she's stupid, but in some sort of existential sense. Like, on the simple level of let's make things slightly nicer, Doreen gets what Lynette is trying to do, but there's some sense that Doreen has that the world can be better. So, I mean, Lynette is thinking about this, I think, exclusively at the level of the three of us can be better. We as individuals can improve ourselves. And Doreen is thinking about it in a broader, more systemic sense, I think. So, this is a really interesting triangulation of these three characters. In a way, we could sort of map mainstream U.S., well, not mainstream necessarily, but we could map major U.S. political positions onto these three characters. Gertie is a conservative. She's a right-winger. She believes in the existing social order and that the existing social order must be defended even through the use of violence. But she is also, interestingly enough, willing to sacrifice... Well, okay, so Lynette gets pregnant, and that's one of the reasons that it seems like Doreen is really interested in improving for the future, is to make life better for Lynette's baby. Gertie is willing to sacrifice the future. And that's an interesting thing, because conservatives, for as much as they, in the US, often adopt policies that are unlikely to improve the future, things like ignoring global climate change, in principle, conservatism is rooted in a desire to build a stable, long-lasting society so that our children and our children's children and whatever bullshit it is can have a good, functioning society. So the fact that Gertie is willing to sacrifice this child for their own betterment, because they get blankets, they get more food, they get more supplies, etc., etc., it's an interesting element. So Gertie is a conservative. She's a right-winger, believes in the existing social order, and is willing to defend that with violence. Lynette is a liberal. So I put her in the camp of like the contemporary Democratic Party, the majority of politicians in the Democratic Party. She believes in things getting better. She wants to improve things, but the structure through which she wants to improve things is fundamentally within the existing system, right? So that's one of the things about liberalism in the US today, is that it doesn't challenge capitalism, for example. It doesn't challenge the major structures of society. It believes in reform, in refining the system that exists to try and eliminate problems. One of the issues with that for Lynette is that when Gertie sells her baby without her consent, which is in itself a fucked up thing that I kind of underplayed with the way I explained that, but Lynette loses faith in the idea of improvement, and she embraces the kind of conservative cruelty that Gertie represents. So this is an interesting element. This is an interesting, I think, sort of commentary on liberalism in the US, because often liberals, especially liberal politicians, when reforms are defeated, whether that's through the Supreme Court, whether that's through conservatives in the legislative branch or whatever it is, defeating a particular objective, liberal politicians, at least, often do embrace more conservative positions. We saw this, for instance, with the Affordable Care Act during Obama's era. when Republicans just refused to support it under any circumstances, Democrats, who had a supermajority and could have passed anything however leftist they wanted, compromised and compromised and compromised away a lot of the good provisions of the Affordable Care Act in a vain attempt to get conservatives to support it. So there's this odd element of liberalism in the US in which liberals are often more likely to embrace conservative positions than they are to embrace leftist positions. Which brings us to Doreen, because I would say Doreen is a leftist. So, whereas Lynette, in the sort of liberal middle position, believes initially that the women can improve themselves through hard work within the existing social system, Doreen seems to envision an alternative world. She seems to envision a world that is more collaborative, that's more collective, that's more supportive, more empathetic. And she questions the fundamental principles upon which this civilization that she finds herself in is founded. So at one point, she has this bit with Gertie. Doreen says, well, civilization is supposed to be better, right? I mean, what Lynette said, that's what people think, that we are uncivilized people and people down the mountain, people in town are civilized, or better than us, better off than us. Gertie says, I don't think that. Doreen says, and down the mountain is where you go when you need to buy things or sell things. Gertie says, what are you getting at? Doreen says, well, I was just wondering, those people in town, they need you to bring them food because they can't grow any of their own, right? Gertie says, so? Doreen says, and it seems like the things that grow out here on the mountain with us. And down there they can make bullets and guns and stuff, but they can't make food. Gertie says, you sure do tell a slow story, Doreen. And Doreen says, well, it just seems to me that their lands down there in civilization ain't very fertile. And I know you don't like no church talk, Gertie, and this ain't church talk. This is just a little bit of God talk. But ain't God, ain't he? Gertie says, God's too mean to be a man. Doreen says, ain't God supposed to have punished the wicked people with land that done dried up and couldn't grow nothing? And weren't God supposed to love the people and give them fertility so that their herds would not diminish? Gertie says, yeah, that's pretty basic. If you got a good life, then you must have done something good. And if you got a shit life, then you must have done fucked up somewhere. Doreen says, well, my question is, well, on the one hand, in town, they got lots of people and their herds don't seem to be diminishing. But on the other hand, they don't have no fertility. They can't even get knocked up like Lynette, right? That's what you said. Gertie says, right. And Doreen says, so do we live on a godforsaken mountain or do we live in paradise? Now, I think that's a really interesting exchange. And I think the question of godforsaken mountain or paradise actually kind of misses the point at this stage of the play. I think Doreen is struggling with a sort of broad existential question that she doesn't yet have the framework to understand. This idea that the world doesn't have to exist like this. It doesn't have to be bad in the ways that it's bad. The world can fundamentally be better. And I think she doesn't yet understand that because Gertie and Lynette have locked her thinking into this urban-rural divide, which is central to the play. But I think by the end of the play, Doreen actually surpasses that divide. It's no longer a question of can we make ourselves better? Can we improve life on the mountain or not? It's a question of, does the world need to function this way? Do the things that make life on the mountain and in town bad need to exist at all? And Doreen never fully comes to terms with this because the ideas that she would need to really sort of conceptualize improving the world in this way are beyond her horizon of expectations. That is, outside her Overton window. She simply doesn't have the theoretical or cognitive or philosophical framework to actually approach what she wants to do. But she does have this bit. So there's this other character, this collective character made up of 3 or more dancers / movers, called Lil Lope. Lil Lope is kind of a weird character because on the one hand, she is represented by a doll that Doreen had made for Lynette's baby. On the other hand, she is represented by these dancers / movers who go out among the audience and really sort of try and bring the audience into this ultimate decision at the end of the play. And Doreen repeatedly sort of senses that there is something outside the world of the play, but she doesn't yet know how to get to it, and it seems to her too potentially threatening to fully commit. But at the end of the play, she says this, and I'll mention this, the idea of music comes up throughout the play, and whether or not singing is good. Gertie hates singing, Doreen wants to sing, Lynette seems largely indifferent to it. Doreen says, I'm kind of scared that this is all there is, that I'm imagining this, all of us sitting together in a room on the tallest mountain, in a church maybe. I'm not sure I know what God is, or what a real church is supposed to look like. But I look out at you, and you look so different from me, and also not different at all. And here we are, maybe, together. And in my heart, this is what church could feel like, a good church, not a stealing church. And we'd sing all together, like we'd sing that song that's so deep in our hearts, we can't quite make out the words, but we would try. She takes the guitar. Because that's all you can do, is try. All we can do is ask for help, from God, from each other. Maybe it's all the same thing in the end. So I'm asking you, straight out, all of you. And I guess I'm asking God, too, if she can hear me, to help me to believe. Because otherwise I really am crazy. And so the dancers or movers who perform Little Lope spread out through the audience, and basically there's a song that the audience is invited to sing along with. And there's 2 endings to the play. Dean has given us 2 different options for what happens. One is if the audience joins Doreen, either in the song or even just standing to support her. And that liberates Doreen. She is freed by that gesture of support. The second ending is if the audience doesn't join her, in which case it's implied that she kills herself.